All right, hit it, Barbie.
Good evening. Welcome to the Land Down Under Hangout for our, what month is it? November read. This was my book. We've done Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. And
We'll just cover over here.
Mel's got the cover over there. It's a stunning book. I didn't order that one. I did the ebook, but it's beautiful. Everyone's been geeking over the book cover. And I think now we should geek on the book.
Yes, let's geek on
the book. Let's go with first impressions. We'll start with Mel since you're at my top corner.
Okay, then. That's not going to help anybody know who's next.
I can.
I'm kidding. It doesn't matter. Yeah, obviously I loved it. I gave this 5 stars, thoroughly enjoyed it, had a great time reading it, thought it was very readable as well as a really fun journey. I didn't feel like it was breaking like huge boundaries, but didn't matter. I still gave it my it factor, which is the 5 stars. So all good for me.
Elizabeth.
I also really enjoyed this book. Read most of it today, about like 80% of it something. So like super readable. I think I found it really interesting to like think about this book in conversation with American Gods by Neil Gaiman. Lots to unpack there. So, but on the whole, really enjoyed it.
Sarah.
Hi. I really enjoyed it too. I enjoyed the mixed mythology. It was interesting what Elizabeth just said about unpacking with American Gods. I haven't actually read American Gods, even though I know Naomi. I think it's Naomi gave it to me. Yes. I actually kept comparing it with Circe, which we also read. I kept thinking there's so many parallels there, and the mortal versus God stuff. Really well written. I kept wanting to Google the places she kept talking because she had such evocative language around the architecture, and there was like, no, this is just going to spoil. I have not looked. I did the audio book, and the narrator was fantastic. I thought she did a really good job, and it was one of the endings that because I was only going to go one or two ways, and it went the second way, but I loved how it kind of spread out, and I want to talk about the ending myself. And anyway, it was really good and really enjoyable, good time.
Naomi.
So I enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. There were parts of it that I wanted to be different, but it wasn't that it was bad. I just wanted something different from the story, which we can go into when we go into more detail. But I did really enjoy it. I enjoyed Caspia's story and how she sort of developed as a person, how she affected not only the god, but also her cousin, and like how that relationship changed them both. So, yeah.
Karina.
I enjoyed it also. It was very pretty, and I enjoyed learning some mythology that I wasn't familiar with, which was cool. I feel like it lacked a little bit of depth that I wanted, but I was okay with it because I haven't been reading much this year, and so having something light and easy to get through was nice. So yeah, I think I gave it 4 on Goodreads. I should remember I only rated it like an hour ago.
I guess I didn't give my rating. So I really enjoyed it. I think the only person, I think I took the longest to read it. I went from audiobook to ebook back to audiobook, and then had a double check with the ebook anyway. I didn't have I really liked it. I loved the way she wrote. I think I was just, because most of what I've done this year has been reread people that I've already read, comfort read. So like I had to find a groove with how she wrote, even though I really liked how the author wrote. It just took a bit. So I finished it yesterday, and I started it 4 weeks ago, and it never takes me that long usually to do a book. So
Bobby, can I just jump in there? Like, I've read one of Silvia Moreno-Garcia's other books that was Certain Dark Things, I think it's called. And the impression that I get from like the books she's published is that she writes really quite differently from book to book. Like, she's quite chameleon in her like style and the things that she writes about. So
I read Prime Meridian, which was a novella, and that one I burned through in a night. Like well, maybe it was a day, like an afternoon or something. Like I burned through it really quickly, and that one was quite heavy compared to this one. Like it was quite just dark and heavy. It's kind of a post-apocalyptic sort of scenario. So
Certain Dark Things was also quite dark, as you might have guessed from the title.
Yeah, I think I'll definitely be reading more from this author. I quite liked what she did, even though I agree with Mel. I don't think a lot of things were groundbreaking, but I do think the fact that we got like a Mexican, like a cast of Mexican characters, the fact that it wasn't set in the US or the UK, but it was about folklore. It was folklore that the Mayan folklore, not so much, but certainly the some of the geography and some of the other things that they referred to, for me was quite nice. It was a bit like going, oh, I remember seeing those, I know what that is, growing up kind of with it sort of just as part of the background that you see in the States, which was nice. And kind of, just like a nice warm feeling. But yeah, and
I was like Sarah, I didn't want to Google things, but I did Google map the locations because I didn't know them well enough to know where things were. And I like the way she actually had them travel pretty much across Mexico. That was quite nice.
Yeah, it was great. And like Elizabeth, like you were saying, I thought of American Gods a lot when I was reading this, in particular with the narrative around how gods exist and continue to thrive because they're what's the word, like
Worship.
Their worshippers keep thinking of them. So like that's why I picked this background. This is the actual crater that they reference, which was which is the entry to Xibalba, and where the two lords came from. So, and the idea was that there was a crater. They popped up, but they didn't start actually thriving as gods until they amassed kind of a group of followers. So yeah. I guess, okay, so endings. Someone brought up endings. Maybe we should talk about the ending first, I guess. So Sarah, you mentioned that you had some thoughts about the ending.
Yeah, I unfortunately started thinking, where is this going to go? I was like, it seems very obvious. There's one of two things: either they are together in some kind of twist, but somebody else is on the throne, and I thought maybe it's Martine who ends up on the throne, or it ends the way he goes back to being a god and she goes back to being immortal, which is what happened. And I was hoping that I'd somehow another plausible thing had missed my my, I don't know, I missed it somehow. But I enjoyed that, what's his name? The French guy, the French demon. Sorry?
Lorray?
Yeah, Lorray. I was like so happy he was back because I enjoyed him very much. And I was like, yes, now I want a buddy cop movie with these guys.
Yes. I'd like to know where they went, because there was this hint at them going to New Orleans, and I was like, oh,
I know. I was like, now I want that story. And I was
sequel,
like,
please.
Yeah, this was awesome. And I was like, that's what I liked. I was like, you've left it with that ending, but where you've taken it, I really love. And like, because it could have been this whole, oh, she did this, but there was just this. It was that I wasn't expecting, and I loved it because I just thought he's so cheeky, and it reminded me a lot of some of the vaginal fantasy stuff we've read in the past with cheeky supernatural spirits and stuff. And I just was like, oh, I love this. And it felt like a slightly different tone coming through, so I could see that kind of coming through. So that was my take. It ended where I thought, oh, this is a plausible ending, or not the plausible, but it's one of the two endings. But I didn't see this buddy road movie coming, and I'm here for it.
It was actually the exact ending I wanted. Like I was going to be okay if it ended up being a more romantic ending, but what I really wanted was for her to just gain her independence and get to go and live her life, and that's exactly what she got, and that's what I wanted. So I was really happy with the ending.
Yeah, I really liked that. I think I would have been a bit uncomfortable if they'd ended up in a relationship, because there's such an imbalance of power there that regardless of whether or not she says she's consensual about it, she's young. It was her first time out of home. It's her coming of age story. So I would have been like, no, she deserves, after all that bullshit and after all of that willingness to do everything, that she deserves to go and off into the sunset and get her own story.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, I was quite happy with that too. Girls over there in Queensland, you're smirking.
What?
Did you have a thought on the ending? You look like you were going to say something.
Yeah, I did. I wanted a romance ending.
Okay.
Is that the thing that you had a disagree, like what you wanted differently?
I either wanted like him to resurrect her as a something so she could live in Shabalba and like experience it with him, because obviously she has had an effect on him and that's changed the world. Like, it's changed their world. Like, or that like I don't know, I wanted more. And then all she got out of it was a bag of pearls. Like, really, sir? That was what you thought she wanted? Really? After all that time traveling with her, you thought that was what was going to make her happy? Like,
I'm going to argue there that, like, I mean, I feel like the ending had some good, like, Hades Persephone vibes going on there. So I feel like, you know, after she's gone off, she's lived her life, she'll eventually, you know, die and return to the underworld and, you know, maybe.
But also, I am totally there for that buddy cop movie of those two traveling around, getting up to all sorts of mischief. I didn't know that I was going to be into it, but I am, and I want it. And I want him to not be her lover, but I want him to like encourage her to like experience life and find a lover without having to be like, oh, I need to save myself for the one true love of my life, and the priest will
Lorraine is the bad influence in the best way possible.
Yeah,
right.
I want him to help her experience life.
Yeah.
That's what
she didn't know what.
I don't want him to be a new love interest for her, and I would hate if that ever happened. Like if she ever wrote up with the ghost that story, I wouldn't want him to be her new love interest. I want him to help her see the world the way that it's meant to be seen at its fullest, not how she sees it as a little country girl. That's what I want.
Especially because like the only thing she could sort of envision as something she wanted to do when she got out of there was like to go in a car and to go dancing. And it was like, oh, okay, there's a lot more that you could be doing than just those two things. Please enjoy those two things, but there's a lot more options out there. And so having someone to help her sort of see a bigger world is a great idea there.
I do wonder if part of why they chose part of why Silvia chose an automobile and dancing was because those were such key things for women in the 20s, and that was part of her keeping it in the historical context that she'd picked, maybe because like she'd already cut her hair, so she was moving in that direction of emancipating herself, but she hadn't drive. And she hadn't and she hadn't gotten to dance yet. So, and also from what I remember, where she was living, the priest would like dancing was just not allowed anyway. Anything beyond slow.
Well, I mean, it seemed like her priest was a very sort of traditional style priest, and I know even when I was a child, our pastor of the church told my mother that I shouldn't be doing any dancing because dancing is the work of the devil, like classical ballet dancing, not like dancing. Like classical ballet. And I'm like, really? That's where you're drawing the line, sir? Classical ballet dancing. Like
that is amazing.
Like
and I guess I felt like it was her kind of also engaging with the parallel of the Mexican Revolution, because she was living in the very Catholic, very like the part of the country that refused to move and embrace the revolution. So, which I don't know, I thought that was really cool. Hi, Kirsten. What'd you think? Hello. What'd you think? We'll bring you in with what you thought, because we're still just kind of hashing out stuff.
Cool. I only just finished because I had a couple of chapters left to go. So I was like, I'll just quickly finish this. But yeah, they were already walking the road, so I didn't have that much to go. Do you want just general thoughts?
Start with general thoughts.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was something different to most things I've read before. Reminded me a little bit of American Gods by Neil Gaiman. Other say that too.
All said
Bingo.
that. A lot of us have said that.
But yeah, I really liked it. I liked that. I actually think I liked it better than American Gods, probably because it wasn't as dark.
Yeah, American Gods
For
is
lots of reasons.
like just,
It is.
and also the religious part of American Gods is a bit heavier as well. Like I think because we know a bit more about the background of Christianity and that sort of God, whereas that Mexican Aztec
Mayan.
God. Sorry, I apologize. I wasn't sure which one. But like those sorts of gods, we don't really know as much about them in a like biblical sense, because like we are in a very Christian style world where we learn a lot more about that religion, even if we're not religious ourselves. So it's easier to feel the fantasy of a story like this, where we don't really know the history of that kind of religion, whereas something like American Gods, even though we know that it's a fantasy story, we still feel it a little bit more heavily because we know the religion a bit more, like we like have history with it, even if it's not something we've grown up with or been to church or anything like that.
But also, like, American Gods is a lot more heavily colonial than this story is.
Yeah.
From what, like, I haven't read American Gods, but from the little bit that I know, I think that too, there's a bit of it more devastation for the gods that have a lack of followers, whereas I'm sorry, I can't remember his name already. I never heard it, so I can't even know how to say it anyway.
There's Hunkame and Wuhukame.
Yeah, so Hunkame was a lot more accepting of the fact that it was natural and normal that they'd moved on, and his brother obviously wasn't, but like it was mostly Hunkame that we had the perspective of, and he was very accepting of all of that situation, whereas from what I understand with American Gods, it's like traumatic and awful what's happening to them.
More of like a war between the old gods and the new gods. And yeah, there's a lot more, like the new gods are like media and I can't even remember what they all were now.
One of them's
technology,
guns or bullets. Remember the guy who it like has the
I
don't remember. It's been a while since I've read it. I mean, I enjoyed it, but I actually think in some ways I liked this one more. Although I did enjoy American Gods. So we were talking about ending, Kirsten. That's where you came in. Was we were partway through hashing out what we thought of the ending specifically. Hey kitty, are you stuck here? Sorry, my cat's trying to get down. There you go.
I really liked the kind of theme of like forgiveness and moving on and not holding on to grudges and that sort of idea. Like, you know, with the gods, the brothers' gods, like they were like reconciled at the end rather than one of them killing the other one. And then the same sort of thing with her and Martin, that she was just like, you know, I don't need to, like, if she didn't really forgive him, but she also was like, I don't need to hold on to a grudge against you. You just go do your thing. I don't want to be involved in with you anymore, but I don't, you know, I'm just moving on. I really liked that.
I did too. I really liked that.
Yeah, she decided to just let it go. Like, it wasn't that she was forgiving him. She was like, I don't need this bad juju in my life. You can just go be you in a place that is not near me. And maybe one day I'll decide to come back and see you, but maybe not.
And I think it's really true to life that, you know, holding on to grudges and holding on to that bad feeling really does you more harm than it does them. And I think I just really liked that kind of message that they had at the end. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah.
I really liked that they didn't end it with her forgiving him. I think if she had forgiven him for all the bullshit that he put through, he grew a bit and he, you know, figured out some stuff, but I feel like if she had forgiven him, that would have been far too much for what he had done. It would have been putting her at a disadvantage. And the fact that that character did not have to do that, I really appreciate it. I feel like there's a lot of female characters where that's just like they're expected to, or that's how they're written, is to forgive everyone and therefore everyone's happy. And being the parent to someone who gets to a child who is female, like I worry about that a lot, because you don't have to forgive everyone.
Yeah,
I even like the fact that she didn't like have to go back to get her mother or anything on those lines. Like, she was moving on past it all and going to get on with her life and everything on those lines. I thought that was really good as well. In fact, I actually got worried when, like, right at the beginning when we started getting Martin's perspective, and I was like, oh no, you're not doing a redemption arc on him, are you? Please don't do a redemption arc on him. And I thought they did it just right. We got enough view into him that we sort of saw him with more depth, but we didn't necessarily have to forgive him for what he'd done or, you know, try to justify it away or anything along those lines.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was surprised to get his perspective as well. I kind of thought that we would just sort of intuit what the forces against them were from, like, just their perspective.
Great.
But I guess that is kind of, I think maybe that expectation was a bit of the American Gods bleeding through for me, because that's the way it works in that particular book.
Yeah, and I think the way she wrote it, most of the demons and the gods were quite flat. I mean, like, even Hunkame, you got a bit of complexity, but I felt like so much of that was dependent on the fact that he had more mortal blood mixing with his own, and so therefore that's why he was being complex, because all those complex things that he was feeling were being attributed to the fact that he was becoming more and more mortal the longer it took him to find all of his pieces. Yeah, because Wuhu Kame, he was very, like, flat, one-dimensional. He was like, I'm pissed at this. This is what I want, and this is what I get, and this is what I expect, and there was no other reason other than, no, this is how I feel, I'm angry, black and white kind of thing. Whereas all the humans had much more complex.
I feel like that's definitely what I would feel like a god would be like, especially gods where there's lots of gods for different things.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have a lot of complexity. They would be representative of where they are from and what they are part of and things like that.
Yeah.
And they're not human. They're not meant to be human.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because in some cases you'll get, like, there's another series that I'm reading where they're not gods necessarily, but they're basically the firstborns of gods, and they're quite complex because they've lived for so long, and that's how they get their complexity, is the fact that they've lived through so much. But their pitfalls are that they tend to forget how long time is, and so that's, like, where, even though they understand a lot and they understand people's behavior, or, like, other firstborns' behavior and patterns of behavior, they're still quite simplistic, but more so, I guess. So, as in these to me seem very flat. Not that I minded. I quite liked the difference between the...
I think that's the difference in the world building. Like, in that world building, they're quite clearly designed to grow and change over time. Whereas in this one, he was very much, especially Hunkame, am I getting it right? Yeah. He didn't live a different life. He didn't do different things. He did the same thing. He lived in the same part of the world. And so that complexity wouldn't have been there despite the years. Yeah. And that's what I sort of thought was well represented by what they did in terms of his character and who he was. And like you said, how that changed as he was becoming more human. So
yeah, and I think that was something interesting you said, Bobby, at the beginning, that this is and it kind of why I wouldn't have minded a romantic ending if they could have worked out the whole Wuhu Kame's issue with, like, wanting to sacrifice the world, because he had a coming of age story too. So while I actually wouldn't have minded, because I think that whilst there was a power imbalance while he was still a god, it was becoming less and less. And in fact, she didn't put up with his shit really once she kind of got into it. She was like, well, you need me as much as I need you to take this out. And so, and as it went on, it was this, you know, it wasn't just mortality, it was the more he was exposed, I think, to the complexity of human beings that I really liked. And, you know, there was this, in the writing, she really talked about how the young man, the naiveness kept coming through in him. And I wouldn't have minded a romantic end, because I felt like they had become equals by, you know, as he grew close to mortality. There wasn't this, we're always going to be like, because he was losing power, he was losing the ability, they needed one another. So I was quite up for it by then.
I guess if maybe for me, because as he loses his godness, his godliness, and becomes more human, I guess it would have had to end, if it was going to be romantic for me to be okay with it, he would have needed to end as a mortal as opposed to the other way around, because I feel like if he was a god and she had joined him in Xibalba, as she was. I think that's what I meant by the power.
No, exactly. I wanted him to become immortal. That was the story I wanted. I wanted him to do the ultimate sacrifice for love. That's what I wanted as far as romance was concerned. Naomi's walked off, and I thought she'd be here for that comment.
I have a couple of thoughts. One was that one of the endings that I had contemplated was whether they had underestimated like the amount of immortality that Cassiopeia was getting, and then so she might supplant him as the ruler. But as I continued on, and like I felt like the parallels with American Gods was becoming a bit stronger, I kind of discarded that a little bit. But the other thing was that I wanted to say was the reason also that the romance works so well is because they made the god vulnerable. Like she really did a good job of giving him those moments where he was vulnerable and able to open up to her, and so in that sense that it's what really made the romance convincing.
It was a viable ending as long as there was an answer for who was going to rule at the end. That was it.
And that was the problem. I thought maybe Martine, but really he hasn't had as much of a redemption arc, be a good ruler. And then I was like, and the other guy, the brother, wants to sacrifice everyone. So because he's so I was like, there isn't, and I'm not unhappy with the ending, but if it had been romantic, he needed to end up as immortal. That was what had to happen in my
Amy's here. She got something to say.
Sorry, I had to go get water.
Okay. I was just saying that to give you a quick recap because we need to hear from David. That I was drawing upon Bobby's comment that this was a coming of age story also for Hokame as well. That he was experiencing the world for the first time. He was coming into his own, and we got to the point where if it had been a romance that had ended it with a love that I had seen it, that I wanted them to both be mortal, but the problem was who would be on the throne. I wanted him to become mortal.
I think I wanted, not necessarily that she ended up with him at the end, but I wanted him to have the full human experience of having a relationship. Not necessarily that like they ended up together. Okay, what I wanted one good bone fest. Let's be honest.
Oh yeah, you didn't like the romping.
I always want a good bone fest. 60 times.
Just one. But like I wanted him to have the full human experience before he went back to being the god of death.
But
That's what I wanted.
She's also a good Catholic girl,
because for him to, if he became fully human, he wouldn't have been able to revert back to a god. That's the implication. And if he becomes fully human, Cassiopeia dies. So, I mean, I get what you're saying, but I actually wonder if the author might have thought, oh, that would be nice and fun, and oh shit, I can't do that because then I have to change the entire story, whole book, in order to make that work.
I think it's just because that was one of the things that Hokame put on the table, was like, that's the thing I could offer, but what he wanted to do was too much. It wasn't worth the bargain, as it made,
I think as I was reading it, I was really shipping it. And then when it got to the end, I was happy that that was how it ended. Like I was happy that she was going off on her own adventure. And
he ended up back as a god, but I am disappointed that they didn't bone. Like that's what
there were lots of bones in there. He had a bone cake. She went through the bone jungle. There were lots of bones, Naomi.
Okay, let's call a spade a spade. That's what I wanted out of life. I wanted them to have sex just once. That's all I wanted. I wanted him in all his fucking godly glory, being all like up in her business. What I wanted. Thank you and good night.
Jade, you're muted. You're gonna have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, we need to hear from David.
I was thinking things were bad enough when she already had one bit of him in her.
Yeah, but this is a bit he'll take out.
The other one you can take out too. She just had to travel all over the.
Yeah, but this bit he'll take in and out and in and out.
Hey, that time didn't work that he just took the bone shard out and put it back in. See, she set it up for that. Oh.
I do feel good about that. That's good. I liked it. Thank you so much for accepting me as I am. This 30-day trash pile.
Right, David, what did you think? We'll go back and give us your overall thoughts. We'll keep going.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
I really liked it. I found it really hard to get into a couple of times, and listening to it as an audiobook, it was hard for me to distinguish some of the names because I guess I'm just not used to, just even the two brothers now, I still can't remember the difference in their names just because I'm not used to looking for that difference. But it was a beautiful story. I think that Sandman was probably closer to what I think it was like than American Gods. I'd love to see that as like a redone as a graphic novel because I think that would flow so much more like some of the Sandman novels. Just with the combination of like real life and like netherworld sort of stuff and how they overlap.
Excuse me while I just tweet to the author. Could you turn it into a graphic novel, please?
You're taking it further and further away from what I want, okay? Just stop.
What? There are erotica graphic novels. I've seen them.
Okay, but can I say that compared to last month, for once we have a teenager who's the most mature person in the whole book.
Was she only a teenager? I forgot about that.
Yes, she was. She was
so mature, yeah.
She's 18.
18? I was
Okay.
going to say 18, 19 years old.
She's got her shit together better than me, and I'm 40.
She's an 18-year-old who's been working in the house of her family for how long? Like, it's not like she's been living a normal child's life.
She's world weary.
Yeah.
Like, world weary. We're all world weary this year, sweetheart. We're all world weary.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just a bit of a shock sometimes when she's referring to the world, not because she knows it outside her village, but because she read about it in a magazine, so it must be true. And that just gives more of a sense of reality to the character than anything else, because if really you are if you really are like growing up away from the center of everything like that, that is your only view might be your only view into the rest of the world, and how different things could be. But still, it was just, her character was still very much grounded the whole time, even when they were being very hard on them. When she was being very hard on herself, she was actually being quite down to earth, much more than the petty gods that she was dealing with.
Yeah.
It didn't really show great judgment driving off with the demon at the end of the into the sunset. But hey, I'm sure that's another story. Part of me is like, that is so screaming a sequel. Like,
well, yes, that's what showed Grace judgment. She's off to, it had be completely under the influence of Lorraine, like that's where she gets completely away from her good Catholic upbringing and really learns what the bones are about, Naomi.
I want her to like go to New Orleans and like meet boys and just like live a life.
Yeah. Going to New Orleans, there are women there too. It would be great. Like
anyone, everybody.
I feel like now if she's going to pick a religion, like she knows that these gods exist. Like they are a real thing. She's really seeing. Why would she continue following fake God in the sky that when she knows that these gods are right there? Like she literally walked their black road. She knows they're there. And she knows that if she follows that religion, when she dies, she will go back there.
I just love the pragmatic way that she dealt with that as well. It's like, right, okay, so sure, I was brought up to be a good Catholic girl. Sure, I went through and I believed in that stuff, but I have to put up with this guy's shit, and he's a god, and no, I'm not going to go with all this other, like, I don't really know how I'll get out of it, but I'll have to think it through. But all this other sort of morality that I've been shoved on is coming up from on high in church, well, and the priest and stuff, well, I know what gods look like now, and God, he did not leave the toilet seat up. So I'm going to go do my own thing.
I want her to go and meet women and talk to them about what she's experienced and like have a resurgence or something of the religion, or like I want her to be the reason he gets more power again. Like I want that kind of thing. No, not through slaughter, through like if you want to add something, you can say it to the crowd. Thank you.
That's just going back. She's had a lot of snark today. She's got no place. She's got no room for more.
Jay has been the sass day of sassiness from Sasstown.
Yeah, well.
Sass.
Just going back to what David said there, I do like Cassiopeia's pragmatism. Like there are a few times early on in the book where she's like, you know, it's not worth having this argument. It's just going to waste my time. And I'm like, yep. You respect your time because no one else is.
Yeah.
Even at the end when she was like, okay, I need to kill myself. And she was like, well, maybe I just need to like give myself up to this guy and be like, and then she was like, you know what? Fuck you and all the horses you rode in on. And like stood to her guns and was like, I'm going to support this guy that I freed from a box in my grandmother's bedroom, and I'm going to do this. And like slit her own throat, which like badass, like absolute most badass move that has ever been done. And managed to not only like free herself from this like trainers that she was, because she'd fallen off the road, which everyone had said don't do it, but she like got him his powers back.
Also, she must have been when she did, like she got told, everyone told her, this is what you got to do, this is what you have to do, you have to take the road this way, only do it this way, whatever, or this is what I'm offering you. And she sat there and she pondered it as she was doing, kind of moving along, and then she went, well, no, I'm going to do my own thing. Or circumstances put her in a situation where she couldn't do what people told her to do for whatever reason. And she was like, you know what? I make my own fucking rules. Go away, you gods. Like,
yep.
I don't know
she
if
always
she
sort of
even,
figured it out.
I couldn't really figure out. I mean, I was really stunned that it was kind of like, you know, if you're playing Super Mario and you jump into a lava and instead you end up at that bit at the end of level 1 where you can warp to all the different levels. Like, that's what it felt like to me. It's like, what do you mean she won? Oh yeah, because when you think about it, the goal was actually to get to this end place. It said nothing about how you had to get there. That was really merely advice. It's like the biggest cheat code ever. I didn't even get the idea she necessarily thought that would happen. It just happened to be accidental winning.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that was kind of the theme, was that she won. She was always one-upping the dudes around her in particular, because she was who she was, and she just did what she needed to do for herself and to make what she wanted to have happen.
Yeah, that was no one's secret plan for her to do that at all, which was really refreshing.
Honestly, figure her out. I wasn't expecting it to be a sacrifice. I thought she was going to take the water somehow. Like, I was like, oh, she's going to, like, there'll be some sort of special way that you can travel through the waters or something. I don't know.
Again, like coming back to the American Gods thing, that's why the sacrifice part didn't surprise me much. Although, like, still super cool, like, plot twist, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she ended up not having to fight Martine. It was her own choice to do it. So, like, I think if he had killed her, or if they had fought and he had killed her, then you know, we would have ended up with something different. Whereas she made the choice.
In theory, if Martin had killed her, would she still have won, and they just hadn't realized that when they made that plan?
No.
So it had to be a sacrifice.
Sacrifice and she had to choose him. Like, she had to say, I'm going to support this religion, kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think the Mayan religion, sacrifice was a big part of the Mayan religion. So
yes, it was.
Yeah.
But also, like, it's interesting too that Martin kind of chose not to kill her in a way. Like, some of it was that he's a coward and couldn't really. But in the end, like, he doesn't like keep at it. He just pushes her away.
Yeah.
Really,
that's actually, Elizabeth, like when I was saying before how I was glad that she didn't forgive him, and I think that specific scene was part of why I was really pleased, because I was holding out as soon as that scene happened that in the end she didn't fully forgive him, because he didn't he chose not to kill her for whatever reason, but he still made it her problem. He was like, it's your fault, you stupid girl. Like, he couldn't get past that it still was her fault that he couldn't do what he was asked to do, and that therefore he was disadvantaged. And so,
but that was his whole thing, was like his own insecurities and his own things that, you know, he felt like his grandfather didn't think he was good enough. He put all of that onto her, and it was everything, all of that was her fault in his mind.
Yeah, it was all everybody else's fault, not him. And it wasn't even just her, it was everybody else was at fault. He was never at fault.
She was just a very common scapegoat for him.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, David.
Sorry, I thought it was a very realistic character there, because normally you've got the whole trope of, oh yes, you've got like relative that's to turn to the dark side sort of thing, and then it ends up trying to stab you and stuff, which is really common. But in reality, if you've got a shithead cousin that's just really annoying, really they might talk big, but at the end of the day, if someone hands them a knife, they're going to go, fuck off.
Exactly.
No.
He was quite willing to kill her, but until he stopped and thought about it. But his reasons for killing her, it's like he didn't even understand why he wasn't going to do it. So we don't really know why he chose not to kill her. We just know that he couldn't, for whatever reason. There was something blocking him from doing it, and he was angry at her because, you know, he couldn't do what he was being told to do, and therefore that meant he wasn't going to win.
Yeah,
I feel like he'd go ahead now. I was just going to say he does at least have a modicum of awareness about all of that as well, which I liked. Like, even though, he kind of, he still blames everyone else, he still kind of, underneath, he realizes that that's what he's doing and that's not a good thing.
So aware that he is not actually living up to the standards. Like, he's not, he isn't good enough and all of those sorts of things, which is why he's seeking for someone to blame. But I also felt like, I think this plays into what David was saying as well, he didn't actually hate her. He just used her as a blame point, and she was the easy thing to push around like a bully. But he wasn't actually like, he didn't see him in any way being a bad guy, a villain, or anything on those lines. He was just this bully cousin who used her as a way to get, to escape himself thinking of himself badly, and because he'd think about her badly instead. So I don't know, I felt more like he was more upset with her and going these more extreme routes at the end because he was upset because she didn't do what he wanted more than anything else. Why didn't you do what I said and sided with the God that I said you should side with, rather than...
grandfather loves you more than me. Why the fuck, why does this all keep coming up? Because a lot of it wasn't about her at all. Like, early on, it's very clearly about like his relationship with his grandfather. I just like the fact that he wasn't a slave to the narrative.
It was more about him, sort of his idea of what his grandfather thought he should be like as a man. And I think he sort of felt like he wanted to be like Cassiopeia, and like he was sort of could see these traits in her that he knew that the grandfather admired and wished that she was a man. Like that was the thing that set him off, and he had that. It was almost like a jealousy.
Yeah. Listen to the audiobook.
I did both the ebook and the audiobook.
That's the audiobook.
It's Cassiopeia?
Cassiopeia,
Cassiopeia.
Yeah. It is a different spelling also in the book to the Greek.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But it's because it's been Mexicanized or Spanishized, like it's
Catholicized.
Yeah, that too.
So how is the constellation spelled?
I'm pretty sure it's CASSIOPIA.
Yeah, they definitely say it. Cassiopeia in the book, and it's Cassiopeia, I think, in English. I thought it was the pair was nice. The pair part was nice. Yeah. I think to build on what we were saying about Martin was, and I think he was a complex character who had, I guess, it sounds a bit silly, but layers, because he didn't want to deal with the work. He didn't want to deal with that deep down, like you said, Mel. he knew what the reasons were, but that means you have to have a hot, cold, hard look at yourself and deal with things. And that's difficult to do. So I'll look for scapegoats. I'll look for other places to put it, that type of thing. And I think that's really true. I think that is true to life. You know, that's.
You know what's really frustrating though about him as a personality, having problems with his grandfather and everything? His grandfather just got handed all of his fortune and everything to him by a god.
I know. And the things he admired, I was just thinking about when we were saying, why is grandfather admire Cassiopeia? It's like, because Cassiopeia is dreaming and has ambition because she has nothing. She hasn't handed anything. Whereas you got, you know, you've got Martin who has everything. So then this privilege gives him the ability to think, well, why can't I just have what I want when I want it? As opposed to I have to work for it. You know, like she understands what education will get her. She understands what money will buy her because she doesn't have anything, right? And so I also thought that was a nice parallel and theme to the brothers, right? It was like, you know, they were so one-dimensional. We were talking about like this feeding on spite and what did you call it, Kirsten? A grudge, and there's just one-layeredness to it because, you know, there's a privilege that comes with that when you don't know, you know, that's all you have because that's your whole world is this one kingdom, and you're not exposed to others of different powers. You're at the top of the pecking order, so you don't know what it's like to be elsewhere and what it means in that way. So I thought there was so many nice parallels that the author drew between the cousins and the brothers, but also what their worldviews were and the differences in them and what they got exposed to. I thought that was really, really nicely done.
I don't actually, you know, I mean, I appreciate that it's not a literary trope, the cousin's not a literary trope, but I don't think he has any excuse for his behavior. I think he's a shithead.
It's a complete shit.
Oh yeah, definitely. I don't think we were trying to excuse it. I think it's just more like, it's interesting to see a villain that you can see the motivations make sense and the motivations are realistic, even if they're not, you can't condone his behavior, but you can see, I can totally see that happening in real life, not, you know, obviously not the God's
it's not
like
ha 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 sort of
that
thing.
sort of a that sort of a character seemed really realistic to me, and I really like a villain that's not a cookie cutter mustache twisting villain, a villain that you can see how they got to that point and why they are the way they are. I really like those kind of villains because they're interesting to read about.
I actually thought similarly about Vukum Kame. Is that how it was said?
Vukum Kame.
Sorry, say again?
Vukum Kame.
Oh, sorry. I tend to Japaneseify when I read other languages because it's like the other language I know. So I didn't do the audiobook, so I didn't have anything to go by. I've felt similarly about him in that I felt like his circumstances made sense in terms of how he got to thinking where he was doing. I didn't condone it, obviously, but I felt like there was actually legitimate reasons for him to actually be concerned about what was going on, in that they weren't having any worshippers, they felt the loss of power, and while Hunkame was okay with all of that and happy to just sort of be with it, I can see why he might be feeling frustrated and just locked down by all of that. And I thought that was interesting motivation as well for him.
Yeah, because his only expectation is you will stand by your brother's side, because what is the other option for him, right? And I totally, and his only other option was to usurp him, from what I can tell.
Well, because his brother wouldn't listen or make any changes. It was just, that's it, that's the line and done.
But there was also wouldn't free him in whatever way that looked like, right? It was like, well, this is like, you know, and I think that's where I found such an interesting, not a parallel, but I kept thinking about Cersei, where she chose to have a mortal life because for her that was a way of, you know, living. She'd lived so long as an immortal and had many experiences, but the experiences that she craved the most were those of having a family and growing old, which she had never done and she wanted to do. And then she wanted to enter her father's realm as a soul, not as a daughter of a god. And I thought that was interesting, and I wondered possibly if that was where that it could have gone as well. That was one thing I kept thinking is, was there an opportunity for Wuku Kame to have that option, or was that not something, you know, to me it was really interesting that they just never considered. And sometimes, I mean, maybe this is also what comes with privilege and expectation of privilege. You know, we heard that from what Martine was being expected, that what you want for yourself isn't you know, necessarily possible. So you don't dream big. We heard that from both the cousins, you know.
I'm hopeful. Like, I was hoping that when he sort of said, "Who is she?" that something might be brought up about her father. Like I was interested to know if he was actually something that was interesting to the story, because they did say at the very beginning that he was a pauper prince, which made me think, you know, was he related to the hero twins in some way? Like, is that where that story was trying to go? And I was interested that, like, I would have been interested to sort of see where that line of thinking went, and then it kind of just petered out.
Sort of peter out. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, but I appreciate that, because I'm glad it didn't do Star Wars, because I got very, like, I'm glad it didn't do Rey is suddenly, because it has to be an inherited thing instead of her being just who she was.
It's like, you know, it would have been interesting if he
totally.
Like,
I agree, but I'm like that we didn't go there.
Son of the third, or a descendant of the hero twins, or anything like that. But it would have been interesting to sort of see. You know, obviously
he feels unfinished.
Vuvu, and now I'm calling him Vuvu, so congratulations.
You're doing it 1.88 speed.
Like,
say it 1.8 speed.
Something in him that was different, that had a strength that he was like not accepting, and it would have been interesting to know: is it just because of the way she's been brought up, so she has that inner strength, or is it something magical, woo-woo, you know, history of her family kind of thing? Like. It just
I only put it down to possibly that he was native Mexican, as opposed to being Spanish Mexican. Indigenous, thank you. I put it down to that, possibly that her father was indigenous, that maybe he was from the peninsula, maybe there was a connection there, but again, it didn't go anywhere. So that was my only thought.
Have come up that, you know, the ancestor was a priest or something, like something that gave her an edge to the Black Road kind of thing. Like, it would have just been interesting. That's all. I'm not saying that
I disagree, because I feel like that would be just framing her in terms of men.
Yeah, which is really what they clearly were not doing. They were trying very hard to make it the thing of she's a woman, and everyone underestimated her because she was female and had no lineage effectively that they recognized as being worth anything. And so therefore, like, that was Wuku Kame's whole like problem, is he was like, I don't understand who she is. How can she do this? Like, she won't listen to me. Martine listens to me, and look, you can do all of these things, but
I think this story could have so easily been this story of this girl who was, you know, controlled by all these other people in her life and was doing, you know, didn't have any control over what was happening, and they didn't do, you know, the author didn't do this. And I thought that was quite refreshing, that she really did have agency through the whole book, and that that's pretty unusual for a story like this, and it could have so easily gone the other way.
Yeah, like, even when she was like, okay, I'll go with you, it was her decision. Like, even when it seemed like it wasn't her decision, it was always her decision.
She could have cut her hand off, and she knew she could have cut her hand off and not had to deal with any of it.
But also it kind of dovetails in with what she actually wanted, which is to go out and see the world.
Yeah, exactly.
And it wasn't so much that she felt like she had to, she more felt like she wanted to, and then when she got more of the backstory, she like understood that if she kind of did give it up, that what she might give up might give her a short-term boost without actually a long-term, like, because, you know, if he actually got in charge and the world run, you know, the rivers ran red kind of thing, that would have been well worse in her future than her just having to put up with this very short-term sort of terrorizing experience that she had to go through. Like, yeah, she did have a lot of agency through the whole entire story. Like, she always, even when it seemed like she wasn't having a choice, she did have a choice. And like, it always felt like she was making an active decision about what she was going to do, even if the active decision was, I'm going to follow you for a while.
Yeah.
Or I agree with you, or I don't want to argue with you. It was her decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think even just that initial one when she went with him, obviously there was some influence from the fact that she was feeling quite hopeless at that time because she'd just been told she wasn't getting an inheritance after all. But I do feel like it was still very muchly her choice, even despite that feeling. Like, because it's someone who's been abused and put under that pressure from family for so long. It's not easy for them to make the decision to leave that level of safety. So yeah, it was definitely still her choice.
Yeah.
And believable that she would make it because she always had that streak of defiance.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And there were definitely, like, I admired, like, even when it seemed like she was a puppet and being, and Hukame was using her as a puppet, she pushed back against it. Like, I keep thinking about how she was with the hair cutting, how she was with the ghosts, and yeah, and I think that started gaining that respect, you know, as his mortality kicked in. He started, you know, realizing they were more equal than he was like, I don't know this world of men, really, you know, I don't know what it's like here. It was very refreshing. And I guess that's why, you know, when I think about that last, you know, episode 9, I get very frustrated because I'm like, so she was a puppet the entire time, whereas in this I was like, oh, good, agency, choices, decisions, you know, yay, you know, sacrifice that meant something. So
the Prima was saying earlier that the seed of her sacrifice was actually planted a long time, like chapters before, when he said,
like our chapter before.
a chapter when he said that you could,
when he offers her an out with Hukame and says, sacrifice yourself now and you can both be mortal and live out a happy life together, like gives her a romantic plot line. Well, that idea was immediately planted in her head then of, okay, if I sacrifice myself but I offer my life in service of him instead of you.
Yeah.
Good point.
And I only realized because I re-listened to that section with Naomi in the car because I'd already listened to it.
Nice. Like, well, thank you.
Well done for picking it up, because I've actually kind of just forgot that scene. I remember it, but I'd sort of like,
that way.
It was so obvious she was never going to do that I'd sort of, you know.
That was what clued me into the fact that we weren't going to get a romantic ending, the fact that she was offered it and immediately rejected it.
Yeah.
I knew pretty much from probably within the first third we weren't going to get a romantic ending. Like,
I was holding out hope, but then when that happened, I was like, oh, okay, so we're getting the other one where he gets his powers back and she gets to not go back to her life.
Yeah.
It reminded me a little bit, just a touch, and I think of the end of Titanic, where you know they're separated, but what you see, and actually they've spoken to a lot of young women about this, and a lot of young women's favorite part is actually the bit seeing Rose go on to have a full life doing all the things she wanted to do and being away from that privilege. And so it reminded me a bit of that. But I was also like, and there's a demon along for the journey. This is great.
I actually thought the exact same thing. That scene in Titanic where they show all the photographs of Rose.
Yeah, it's such a great scene. And I just go, yes.
And I actually thought of that exact scene too as I was reading. Like, this is her moment of, like, I had this momentous romance thing, this, you know, crazy thing that happened in my life, but I'm young and I've got so many other things to do with my life, you know. And one of the things, you know, she wanted to dance and she wanted to Was it,
Drive
what
a
was the
car.
other one? Swim in the
Drive a
ocean,
car.
drive the
Swim in an
car.
ocean, drive a car.
And she's
Seriously?
and she's like, I want you to teach me to drive the car. And I'm like, yeah, she's
Serious
off doing her
question.
stuff.
Does that make Jack Dawson and by extension then Hunkame a manic pixie dream girl?
Yes.
Kind of, yeah. I never
Yeah,
thought about it
kinda.
that way, but
Kinda.
he sort of,
Yeah, Death God is a manic pixie dream.
you don't usually
Right.
get, well, it's that trope of like the death of a woman being the cause of the man's quest.
Fridging.
Yeah, which is usually the way it goes. But
Yeah, well, I mean, again, bringing it back to American Gods.
Yeah.
I probably would argue that there's less of the manic pixie dream girl about Hunkame, just because while he did create opportunities for her to explore some of those things, I wouldn't say he had quite the same level energy of zaniness that he needed for that role.
No.
I was just laughing
he
because
did have his own objectives. He wasn't just there to help her figure her own shit out. He had his
But
own
I will
objectives.
argue for Jack Doylson definitely being a manic pixie dream girl. We're
Oh
going with
yeah,
that.
I'm kind of with you on that. He's only there to help Rose.
I was just laughing because David picked a really interesting time to come back. Part of the conversation to jump into there. You're on mute.
You're on mute.
David, you're on mute.
I was actually listening the whole time, but no, I'm totally down with Jack being a manic pixie dream girl.
Yep.
Awesome.
Okay, so I did say that I was going to check out because Silvia has book club questions on her website. So, and this one probably is kind of an easy one, but I'd be interested to see how far our group takes it. In which was one of the questions she had up there was, how would you see it playing out if we took it out of the 1920s and brought it into modern day? Because I certainly think you could play the whole thing again with some minor changes and it would probably still work out. But yeah, what do other people think?
Yeah, I did think about that. Like, it's an interesting choice to set it in the 1920s.
Just thought it was great aesthetic.
I almost wonder if part of why you did that, aside from the fact that there's a lot of Mexican history that happens in the 1920s that people aren't aware of. No one was paying attention to Mexico at that point in time. And in particular, she makes a lot of social commentary critiques around like the US and Mexico and that relationship, which was along the border and stuff, which was very interesting. But and one of the reasons why she said she wrote this book was because it was a story she could tell. This was the region she grew up in. This was her family history in a lot of ways. So, and she didn't have this growing up, so she wanted to write a story. But I was wondering if part of also why she might have picked the 1920s is because for me, reading through it, when Cassiopeia would point out, this is a dude, like this is a guy, it's, you know, this guy is telling me what to do again, and look, this guy is behaving this way for this reason. It was almost easy to sit there and go, well, of course he would have done that back then because that's what he would have been expected to do. It was a lot easier to put it in the context of and call it out as being this behavior because historically we all know they did that had happened then, but it might be harder to see or pick it up now because it's a lot easier for people to go, well, no, that doesn't happen anymore. We've had emancipation, we've had all this other stuff.
I think
Definitely agree there,
yeah, I think if you take, it could be that you're shifting around the situation, so it may not be a family expectation. I just, for some reason, possibly because I also remember hearing Beyond the Screenplay talked about this at large, is if you think about The Devil Wears Prada, which is a situation where our protagonist finds herself in a situation where she's like, if I can get a year under this awful tyrannical woman, I can write my ticket anywhere. So if you kind of swap that around to the grandfather as a tyrannical boss, and then you've got somebody else who's the other, you know, like it could be almost like a situation of the work situation where, you know, you're being sent out to deliver something for the company. Like it could be something, a more situation like that if you're setting it in modern day. Like where does this, and what's the payoff? Why is this person in this situation? So that could be a possibility to play around with plot device-wise. And I also would love to see some playing around with genders and cis relationships. Like why do the gods have to be male? Why do they have to, you know, like I'd love to play around with that kind of stuff.
Make her a lady love and
Hell yeah.
Honestly, to make it more modern, you wouldn't actually even have to change a single part of the family dynamic at all, unfortunately. There are still families out there that would have that more entrenched in the culture.
Oh, yeah.
But the one thing I found the most jarring when thinking of the whole thing was how easy it was to cross the border.
Oh, yes.
Oh, me
like-
too.
I was thinking that as well.
I'm
and I
so glad
spoke
you said that.
English
I thought
and
the
it was
same thing.
good.
I'm like,
I'm
I
like,
thought you said
whoa.
it was prohibition and that it'd been good. But how come you guys are going back and forth and back and forth and back?
Yeah, I was wondering about that too, but because I know practically nothing about it, I was like, maybe it
I
was
trust
really easy to cross the border back then. Like,
But that's the thing. It was that it's actually a far more recent thing that it's been changed. Workers used to cross the back and forth across the border all the time up until I think the 80s. I could be wrong.
Even later than that. So I actually, my mum and I got to walk across the border in El Paso, and we did it in two places on a road trip just because you could, and they didn't like I think she had to show her driver's license but you'd have to do that at the Canadian border. But it wasn't this whole guns or whatever, nothing like that. It was literally just a checkpoint, like any other border control checkpoint I've ever seen when I was like 5 or 6.
Yeah, and I got the idea of a checkpoint, but they got on a train in one city in one country and got off in another without border control coming through. And I've got trains in Europe and border control come through the train. So I was like, really?
Yeah, but they were still in Mexico. They were still in Mexico. They were just going across provinces. It's like going across states. It wasn't until
Didn't they go to El Paso?
El Paso.
Or was El Paso
Yeah, El
part
Paso is the only place they crossed.
Yeah, that's the only place they crossed, and they did talk about how the reason why she could speak such good English and she could understand them was because Dad speaks all languages.
Mm.
So,
but that's all that was really needed.
Yeah.
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 They got off the train in El Paso though. That's the bit.
Yeah, they got off the train, but then they got back on and they go back across the border. That's the only crossing.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just thought I just found that whole, okay, it's prohibition, so they're bootlegging stuff across the border, but they just went in a train and nobody checked anything. So I was kind of like, well, that's how you're getting so much booze into America, is no one's looking.
Well, yeah, and also, but I mean, particularly in El Paso. El Paso is a border town out in the middle of nowhere. Like, and even now it's a lot easier to cross it someplace like that, and the security would have been far more lax. And even back then, I suspect it still would have been predominantly either mixed Latinx American or would have been either Mexican American or indigenous Mexican, etc. Because of geographic.
Yeah, because I think, was it Baja or was it somewhere else where they're talking about there was a definite border and people would come below and
Tijuana.
Was it Tijuana? Yeah.
Tijuana is it's part of Baja, and Baja includes the bottom third of California. It's like a cultural region more than anything else.
You're right. Yeah.
And,
okay.
Yeah, and Tijuana, it was a really big tourist draw. So people from Los Angeles, the movie stars, drive into Tijuana for the weekend. It'd be like going to Palm Springs. Yeah. So so the border was quite. Like, they were just used to high volume people coming over, and they would just sort of turn a blind eye because it was all rich people.
Yeah. It's all the people going across the border to spend their money on booze.
Booze and food.
Yeah. When we go offline, remind me to discuss the story about the border stuff, which I'd listened to on 99PI.
Okay.
It actually made me really sad when she was saying, oh yeah, unlike all the other girls, I wasn't trying to bleach my skin with lemons and stuff to make myself look prettier. And I just died a little inside at that.
That's really interesting. I wanted to talk about this because this was something I actually learned from so whenever I was at uni and I was working in the exchange student office. We had my university had a direct exchange with University of Monterrey, Mexico, and so for me growing up, most of the Mexican-speaking people that I interacted with tended to have darker skin. Like, they looked like Selena to me. Like everyone kind of was that sort of shade-ish. I'm sure there were variants, but it was that type of profile. Whereas, and then I met these two sisters who were dark jet black hair, white skin, and they were from Mexico. And I was like, oh, this is okay, cool, whatever. And I was like, what? I was a bit confused, and she's like, "Oh no, my family's from Spain. We were the colonists." And so you actually have this break apparently, from what she was telling me about how you've got, you had the Spaniards who'd come over and settled, and they all intermarried and whatever, and sometimes they would take a local, but the desirable color was white. So they would, because they wanted to look like the Spanish, they didn't want to look like the indigenous Mayans or Aztecans or whoever else, the Chicanos, etc.
Yeah, it's a similar situation in parts of Southeast Asia as well.
I was going to say the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially with the Chinese coming in and things like that, and it's so that white skin, as well as the Western influence as well, of course.
And it's also a like a thing about, and I suppose there was a thing even in you know, Europe back a ways, you know, like I'm thinking like Jane Austen times, where it's like if you've got dark skin, that means to work out in the field and you're getting tan, and when you've got white skin, it's like it's a class divide as well, of like. Your white skin is like a way of proving that you're higher class because you don't have to work.
Yeah.
Whereas it's almost the opposite today. If you've got a tan, that means you're a person of leisure and you can sit out in the sun, whereas, you know, the rest of us are stuck inside.
But only in Western culture.
Yes.
Yeah, and not even all of Western culture.
Why?
Depends what you do, of course. Like living wise, there's everybody has to earn a crust and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I thought it was also, you know, once again an interesting insight into the, you know, the colonialism and the displacement and disparagement of indigenous cultures. And slavery as well. I mean, there was one of the towns which I can't remember where they went. It was cool. It had like carnival happening. I don't remember which town that was. And there was just the talk of the black community coming into town and like, oh, we can all mix on this one night, but the rest of the night we're all in a, you know, like we're all back into our segmented hierarchy, you know. And I know there's still a lot of that roughness throughout South America, Central and South America, you know, because of the slave trade and everything. That's, you know, it's just life.
New Orleans, like that one.
Yes, she's up to New Orleans. Woohoo! You think you're escaping? No. Is that a pussycat going behind you?
Sorry.
No, just a cushion, I think.
Oh, okay. I thought it was a pussycat. I was like excited.
We're going to
tail shaped.
Oh, you're going to bed. Okay, night, guys.
Bye.
Do we have anything else, guys?
I was going to say the gift that she got, I was very impressed with. I would love to get the gift of being able to speak every language.
Oh, I know. That was so cool. I was like, yes.
Like when she's like, I don't want anything, and he's like, I'm going to give you this. I would be like, well, I wouldn't say no. I wouldn't be saying no to that.
No. And I did wonder, actually, I just had a wonder. I was like, why is this why she kind of could understand the parrot so well? Where the parrot was like, you know, Laray's parrot, it was made it, you know, almost, they had like almost
Raven.
Raven? Was it a raven? I thought it was a parrot.
Parrot. Yeah.
And then and she thought something, and the parrot apparently like commented on her thoughts. I was like, well, there you go. You can even speak the animals to the animals. You're, you know, Snow White. Which was cool. And she can speak to ghosts too, right?
That one I was less like, I was less envious of that skill. I was like, you know what, I can live without speaking to ghosts. But
I met your ghosts. They're pretty nasty. I don't want to talk to them.
I mean, and that kind of gift more than anything kind of like begs for a sequel, really.
Yeah.
Like, because that didn't actually come up again. It's just a thing that's left hanging there.
I was actually kind of surprised she even got the pearls, because I was like, oh, well, she can speak lots of languages. That's the skill set that's going to really help her going forward.
Yeah, I was like, oh, jobs, you're going to get there. It's going to be easy for you to work.
Although, you know, pearls are also useful in a practical way as well.
Oh, yeah. I just wasn't expecting them as well. I was like, oh, the languages thing that's a really thoughtful gift.
I was actually a bit surprised by that, because I was thinking the smart thing to do was like, right, so you lost all humanity and you're just a pure god. No, I want nothing from you, no bargains, no one-way thing, I'm walking. I thought was a really smart idea. Because it's not like there's the humanity there anymore. It's like a very dangerous thing to deal with.
No, that's not true. They certainly implied that there was at least a speck of humanity left in him.
And behind his eye.
That's right.
Oh, okay.
That's right. It's true. Yeah.
I've forgotten about that.
Yeah.
The assumption was that he was going to turn completely deify again or something, and he didn't.
Yeah, but in the end, I thought that the languages was a better gift because not only was it something that would enable her to go and do the things she wanted to do to get out there in the world and explore and all of that. Obviously, money helps with that, but like pearls are the kind of things that can be just stolen and taken from you so easily. Like you can't.
That you have that they know you have them. Yeah.
But also to back up, it's the gift of languages that says that he really knows who she is.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And also, like with the what I appreciated was that when they had their like come together moment on the beach, like it was made pretty darn clear that he understood what he was going to be losing, and he wanted to make sure he knew he was losing her, and he wanted to prepare her for that so that she didn't think he never cared, sort of thing. Like he kind of came around and was like, fine, I need to talk, I need to communicate this stuff, it's important.
Just surprisingly mature, really.
Yeah. See,
I think it was kind of nice of him,
emotional maturity development arcs happening. I like this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's why I loved it so much. It just, like, there was no point where I felt like, oh my God, that was just a stupid choice, or that was just a, poorly done thing or something. Like, I just felt like everything was done well.
And even though theming, for instance, like detailed romance, I liked the romance because he wasn't super whingy. He was a bit naive and a bit oblivious, but he learned and he figured it out, and she called him on it, and like there was a back and forth and give and take, and it wasn't just if she called him on it, he would go and have a whinge. He would listen, and he might not quite get it at first, but he'd think about it, and then he'd try and respond. Like I quite like that.
Yeah,
that's my kind of.
I thought it was even if it had gone a romantic way, I would have been quite happy with it because it was a well done romance. Even if I'm not massively fan of power imbalances and things, but there was a question behind whether he would even remember being a god. Blah 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 blah. Whatever. The point is that it was a fairly well balanced relationship as far as I could see, in as much as it could be under those circumstances. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I touched on it before. I thought the theming and those almost secular relationships with the themes, it was really well thought out. There a lot of thought and work went into that, and I appreciated it. And I feel that's often when you can really get your theming right is when an author can take something to that next level. And I think that's why I enjoyed this so much. I felt there was such, not just circular, but they kind of did this, if that makes sense. I don't know what that's called, but it kept coming around on itself, and then it would evolve into something else, but it would come around on itself. And it wasn't like it was just like, well, this person's like, this cousin's like this cousin, and this cousin's like this cousin. There's this great melding between the gods and the cousins, and both sides had both. And then there was the worlds that they had, the world of privilege, the world of the underworld, and I really enjoyed that. So,
I also like the fact that it wasn't like theming that hit you over the head constantly with it either. Like it blended well in the story, and it didn't feel like the author was like lecturing you or anything. And the story was just so very readable at the same time. So it was just, I don't know, just a very well balanced book.
Yeah. This is the kind of book I will, there's some, a lot of the stuff we read, I know I can only recommend it to sci-fi or fantasy people, but this is the kind of thing I feel would have a broader audience that I could recommend it to. I'd be like, I think you'd enjoy this. This is a, and it's not like,
It's not a fantasy book per se. It's actually more of a cultural book, and they've just written it in a particular time period using the culture that's there, and it happens to be fantasy because we don't believe in those gods.
Yeah, it gives you this good.
It's like magic realism, I think, is the technical term.
Sorry?
The publisher calls it magic realism, which is a genre under fantasy because of what it is. But anyway, sorry, you were saying something.
I can't remember, but it reminds me of a book, and I don't know the name of it. It was a New Zealand book. I think it was set in New Zealand. Different New Zealand author, but it was about a farmer who begins a relationship with an angel and won a heap of awards. I don't know if you know.
Oh, I know that one. It's by Elizabeth Knox.
I've got the right person here who remembers everything.
Yeah.
Like,
That is read everything.
It's not the Vintner's something.
That's it. Vintner's Love or Vintner's...
There was a sequel, I think, called The Angel's Cut.
Okay, I just remember, reading the Vintner's something. There you go. Look, Elizabeth, bring her along to every time.
I can't remember. A friend of mine actually sent a copy of that to me, so I remember it well.
Okay, well, there you go. I couldn't remember the book. All I remember is it's about a farmer and an angel, or it turns out...
Yeah, set in Italy, I think.
Yeah, sorry?
Set in Italy, I think, yeah.
Yeah, is that what it is? I know it was a New Zealand author. But that's always like, was it, because it could have been a farm or a vineyard in New Zealand, but yeah. And it was, I loved it because the same thing as this is like this entry point almost, I don't want to call it an entry point like it's a, this is your gateway drug into fantasy land, but it's
I like gateway drug, go for it.
But it's this way of melding people melding, I don't know, like, I don't know what you just called it, Bobby. What was it?
Magical realism.
Magical realism with the mythology that makes things approachable, or helps people understand cultural different themes that need to be explored, but in an accessible way, because there's a hyperness to it. And I really enjoyed that about the Vintner's Luck. Did I get it right this time?
Vintner's Luck, I think that's what it was called. Although I think I'm gonna have to push back a little bit about it being magical realism, because that has some very particular cultural connotations.
Okay.
Especially around like Indigenous beliefs and that sort of thing. That is not the case for the Vintner's Luck, which is definitely more of a Western literary tradition.
Well, I don't know. Magic realism usually is more often used to describe books like this one, which have a more Indigenous. I haven't looked up the actual definition of magical realism. When I was reading up about the author, they were talking, like, it was one of the questions she was dissecting, but she didn't actually give a definition of what magic realism is.
Yeah, it's a tradition that does come more out of like South America, and kind of relates to it's that sort of intersection where like the Western world calls it fantasy, but is may like be seen just as like the beliefs of a non-Western culture. So I guess like a good analogy for Australia would be the Indigenous Dreamtime, where like if you wrote a book about using kind of that, it would be considered fantasy, but it's not actually fantasy for that culture. It's a reality.
Everyday life sort of thing. Is that
that's what I meant by saying like that the people in this believe in this as a religion, therefore it's not actually magic to them, it's their culture and their
I have to admit I was a bit uncomfortable with the word magic. For me, and that's where I guess I'm comparing it slightly to the Vintner's Luck. It's more like the mythology or the belief system, because the Vintner's Luck from memory has a lot around the seraphim and the history, the angel lore. So for me, there is a lore to that. There's something that's based in scripture and other types of things. So I was like, and for me, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And then when I remember looking into it, it's like, oh, this is all based on something. Like, this is not like just made up out of that. There's research and there's background and archaeological stuff to this. So
I guess
it's definitely some parallels.
Mercy too, like it's
exactly.
It's obviously a religion that's not followed as, I don't know, I presume there's probably some people out there still, following ancient Greek mythology, but it's not like it's the dominant thing anymore. But like it's based on that mythological system that was a religion then, and it's like it's not really fantasy because it's based on that religion, but it's also not. It's like, where do you? I guess
it still can't really be considered magical realism though.
Yeah.
Especially like Cersei, especially could not be considered magic realism.
No, it's more like another take on a
It's like it's more again Western literary tradition. Like it's not there. It's not a living religion. There are not still. Well, not really. There are not still like. I mean, it may be different in Greece, perhaps, but it's not like. It's not a living religion in the same way that.
No, exactly.
The Mayan like traditions carry on in Mexico.
Wondering how this connects to things like wuxia, because in China, wuxia is not actually considered fantasy per se. Wuxia, sorry, I always say it wrong. I'm sorry. Pronunciation. I read things too much and then don't know how to say them.
Yeah, I'm
that one's a tricky one too. Like,
yeah. Wait, wuxia. It's in that respect. It's not so much. Well, it is kind of almost religion for them, but not quite. But it is sort of is similar in that respects that they see it as more historical than they see it as being, in this case, it's not so much historical, it's more cultural, but they see those sorts of stories as being more historical than they see them as being fantasy per se. So it's not the same thing, but it's a similar kind of mindset in that it doesn't fit into fantasy the way Western culture would tend to fit these things into fantasy.
I think fantasy as a genre is very problematic as far as putting things into categories anyway. Like I was having this conversation with some kids at school, like because they were looking at this book and they said, oh, what genre would this go in? And I said, well, it's kind of a post-apocalyptic novel, so it falls under that speculative fiction umbrella. But then like, I'm trying to explain to them what speculative fiction was because they've heard of science fiction and they've heard of fantasy. And I'm like, well, sometimes the book doesn't, it's kind of in between, or it's kind of, it falls under this umbrella of things that are not exactly realistic to what happens in real life, but it's hard to put them in boxes, which is why I haven't genreified the library, because I'm like, this is too hard.
Well, the other thing too is so often fantasy for us is we have this picture of like a historical Western culture, and it's like, and that sort of has for years limited what fantasy would do, and like people would be like, oh, women can't do that. It's like it's fantasy.
That's a really good point, Mel.
Yeah, and so like I feel like fantasy is difficult from that reason. Science is supposed to be in some way scientific, but even then it gets like really weird because it's like sometimes science is actually fantasy. So it's all. That's why I just prefer the term speculative fiction overall, because as much as I know that some people sort of really reject it, I'm like, but it just sounds like it encompasses so much more than what when you say SFF does.
And that's, I feel that's why I was very uncomfortable. I don't want to call this a fantasy novel because
I don't want to call it speculative fiction either, though. I don't feel like it's speculative fiction either.
And to me, it's literature that has what and I'm a Western person, what I'd say is a strong mythology and a fantastic cultural reference to both what was going on at the time, but also an understanding of the history of the Indigenous people. I just really enjoyed it for that sake. And I think also that's again why I feel like it would also, because it's, as you said, maybe it's more got a broader thing, it would appeal to so many people because there's so many different elements to it. So I feel like it's one that I'd recommend my mother would read this, and I can't tell her to read Mistborn. It's just I couldn't tell her to, even though I think she kind of could enjoy it.
I feel like that all the time.
Like, he writes way too many things. I'll be like, yeah, I know. But no, like I couldn't get her to. Who else do we love? Who's a sci-fi author?
Bob.
I couldn't get her to read the Bobiverse. I couldn't get my father to read the Bobiverse, even though I think he would love it. But I could probably get him to, like, he'd probably look at this and go, "Oh, okay, this actually sounds really interesting." It's in the 1920s in Mexico.
I would love
wow,
to make the Bobiverse in the movies, because my dad doesn't really read at all, like except for car magazines. But I know he would love Bobiverse.
Yeah, I know, right? I just like. I think you would just. I think the other. Yeah. Anyway, and I suppose Like I know my dad. Oh, sorry, go.
No, I was just going to say, like, maybe that is partly like that kind of overlap between magic realism and Western literary tradition that makes it kind of more accessible.
It's just there's so many interesting things that make, like, you've got an avenue into this from different angles, if that makes sense. You might have come to it, you go like, I'm interested in modern mythology. You might come into this because I typically read fantasy, or you might come into this going, this is
I'm interested in the 1920s.
Exactly, which is where I think my father would be really interested, right? He'd be, oh, I know there was lots of stuff happening at that point in Mexico, very interesting time. So I think there's so many excellent avenues, and that's possibly where I was going with why I was reminded of the Vintner's Luck, is because I felt like that was similar, and there's different avenues into this book. Are you interested in angel law? Are you interested in winemaking? There's a shitload of people out there like that. Are you interested in Italy, set in the particular time? Lots of people are, so there's different avenues into things.
But I think that's why, like, other authors, like what's her face, who Handmaid's Tale.
It's good.
Margaret
We have
Atwood.
Elizabeth here. She remembers everybody.
Yeah, I know, because she's.
How did you think so?
I was just like, why isn't Karina here? It's Karina's like favorite author. But yeah, Margaret Atwood is her work is often that sort of bridging type work as well, and quite often gets put in both sections, literary and SFF. So it's sort of all sits in that sort of area. So.
Yeah, and that is again to what Kirsten said. It is an unfair to genre. It's like American Library. Actually, they don't. Yeah, they do the same. Like it's unfair. All the fictions together, all of it. It's all alphabetical order. Go for your life.
I've been seeing a lot of stuff coming across through like my TL like chat channels and stuff. Like listserv type things, saying a lot of especially primary school libraries, they've genreified the fiction collection in the library, so they have like a fantasy section, kind of like in a bookstore, and a science fiction section and a humor section. But then people are like, well, where do I put this book? It belongs here and here. And a lot of the time they just say, well, we have more than one copy, and we put one copy here and one copy here. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds like, if someone wants to give me like a month of work to just do that, it sounds like it would be great. But like at the moment, this is just, that's in the too hard basket. But apparently nearly everybody who has done it has said that the kids are borrowing more, because they kind of know their thing that they like, and they go to that section that they like. And I don't know whether maybe they're not branching out as much as they might, but then
and that's
I don't think I did at that age.
Like, at that, especially at primary, I'm sort of like, I just want the kids to be going in and trying different things to see what they do like. For myself personally, if I had to go to the library or the bookshop and not have my section to go to, I probably wouldn't be too happy. But at the primary school age, I'm like, but it's not that big, especially at a primary school library, it's not that big that it's that hard to get through the collection and find a few different things. And then at least you're being exposed to different stuff and other options. I
don't think they didn't put anything into genre in my high school library. All the fiction was together.
No,
then a decimal system for everything else.
Mine had stickers, so they didn't, it was all like, alphabetically.
Yeah.
But it had certain stickers. So like if you're looking for something set in the past, like a historical book, historical fiction, it would have a brown sticker. If you wanted something that was more about space or whatever, then it would have a blue sticker. If you wanted something that had magic in it, it had a purple sticker. But that's it. Like otherwise it was all I vaguely remember the stickers, but I had no idea what they meant. And more often than not, there was like 2 to 3 stickers, because exactly this reason. It's like, it's all of these things.
My library still does them. They have sections, but they still do stickers on them. So they've actually got like a little planet sticker that's put on the spines of all the sci-fi books.
I'll show you what ours is. Hang on.
Oh yes, please. We get to see a live example.
Yeah.
This is the like my local library. Can you guys hear me? Sorry, I forgot that I haven't got this microphone on. I've got that microphone on. So they've actually put this in science fiction. I think they use that for science fiction and fantasy. I can't make that focus.
Is that a UFO?
It's a little UFO.
Right.
So I think that they use that for science fiction and fantasy though. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, mine does as well. They just have one for both. So
but yeah, it says Fant. Like it says FANT as in fantasy, but it's a picture of a UFO. So obviously they're like, yeah, that all goes together. So
yeah. What were the other questions?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no,
I
you're
was
right
going
to
to say,
do
what
that.
were the other questions that Bobby, the author, had set for us?
Oh, actually,
in her homework.
we naturally flowed through most of them anyway. The things like the character arcs and changing them before and after. The bit about if you wanted to see a sequel, who would it be with? Like we just naturally did that. So the only one was the bit about putting it in a different time period.
Because that's the extension question.
Yeah, that's the extension question. We got extra credit.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
guys, if it's good, then I think we'll wrap up the recording.
Yeah.
Oh.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Read
right,
it. It's good.
Yeah, please do read it.
Please do read it.
Highly recommend it. And next month we are talking, we are reading Critical Role Vox Machina Origins, which is a comic. All right, thanks for anybody who's watching.